at the bar. I'm Hannah. I'm the Education and Marketing Manager here.
Turn it on.
I can't hear you.
Oh, am I not close enough to it?
Yeah.
All right. Wow, you got to get your mouth really close to this thing. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Beaches Museum. I'm Hannah. I'm the Education and Marketing Manager. I wanted to thank you all for coming. I especially wanted to thank any members or new members tonight. Thank you so much for joining or being a member. I wanted to thank any donors and board members that are in attendance. Thanks for supporting the museum and being a part of this. I'd also like to thank Florida Humanities. Tonight's program is made possible through a grant that they afforded to us. Yay, Florida Humanities. I'm sure everybody's noticed by now, but the bar is back there, snacks are there, restrooms are there if anyone needs them. And I also wanted to promote some of the upcoming events we've got. We've got a concert series. So our next concert is Walter Parks and the Unlawful Assembly. That's a concert by Walter Parks and his group. So he's doing a sort of historical music for this one, swamp hollers and hymnals, and it's interesting, and it's a fusion of different cultures, so I think this crowd would appreciate that. So tickets are available on our website. Also coming up, we have an art exhibit after November 16th. Scotty Cousin will be exhibiting his work in our temporary gallery, so keep an eye out for more announcements relating to that. And that's everything. Woo. Now I'm going to give the floor to Carrie. We're very excited for More Than Orange Blossoms, so
Take it away. Thank you very much. I'll get out of the way so that you can actually see the pictures. I brought pictures. Me llamo Carrie Sue Ayvar. My name is Carrie Sue Ayvar. And yes, I can get tongue-tied in at least 2 languages and sometimes more. But tonight will all be in English. Because I'm going to be talking about more than orange blossoms. You have to turn it on first. Oh, there we go. Feisty, fabulous, fierce, fantastic females who have called Florida home. I will be really honest with you. I don't have the time to even tell you about so many more of the women that I would like to, let alone their stories. I can't even mention them all. So hopefully this is just the beginning of the conversation. But the women that we're going to talk about today are some of the women who inspire me on a daily basis. They truly do. We stand on their shoulders. These women are women who should be in the history books, and most often aren't. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be. They are women of courage and commitment and character who not only transformed our state of Florida, but they transformed our country and our world many times over. This is just the start of the conversation. I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue this at the end and just get you thinking about some of the other women in your lives. I do have notes. I want to make sure, especially the quotes, I get them right and keep me ongoing. But I really believe we stand on their shoulders, and I feel oftentimes that they are reaching up and holding us strong so we can continue on their paths and our own paths. And I'd like to start with a quote by Dr. Anna Albertina Lindstedt Darrow. She was known as a pioneering female physician on the Florida frontier. Literally was called the petticoat doctor of the Everglades, because that's where she practiced in the early teens and 20s, that's right. But she said something, one of my favorite quotes. She said, "If you've never heard the roar of a bull alligator and some night bird answer, why, you just haven't lived." And it's that attitude. I'll talk a little more about her later, but it's that attitude that seems to run through most of these women's lives, through all the hardship and the hard things that they had to, difficulties they had to live through. They all seem to find real beauty and strength in all of that, including the only recognized female founder of a large American city, Julia Tuttle, known as the mother of Miami. You all heard about Miami. If you ever go down there, there's a causeway with her name. When she first came down, she came from Cleveland, Ohio, to visit her father, who was living in the area at the time, the 1870s. And it was wilderness. It was not only hot and harsh and humid, but there were bugs as wild as the animals that roamed the area. There were things like swamp deer and wolves and, of course, alligators and sharks and even bears. And it was hot and humid. It was jungle down there. But she saw so much more than that. She saw its beauty and its possibilities. And even though her father moved away from that area, she never forgot it. And when she was widowed, now with 2 young children, she ran her husband's business for a while and then sold it so she could move down to this barren area. And she bought 640 acres right along the Miami River, overlooking Biscayne Bay. She was only the second person to move down there permanently. The only other family that was there were the Brickles, William and Mary Brickle. If you've ever gone down there, there's Brickle Avenue you'll travel over. And they were the only other ones living there along Biscayne Bay. But she knew she was a visionary, but she was also a businesswoman. She knew that people would come here if they could get a way down there. And the only way to do that was to bring the railroad. So she went to try to bring the railroad down. She got in touch with Henry Plant, who was building the railroad, yep, just like your hat over there, thank you. I'll bring everybody to demonstrate, that was great. All the way down the West Coast. And the reason she got in touch with Henry Plant, she knew somebody that she had known from up north, James Ingram, who was working for him. So she had an in. And she really worked hard to try to convince him. She actually did get him to send a exploration survey all the way from the West Coast across what would now be called Alligator Alley. And they eventually made it across the Everglades, across the swamps, all the way to Biscayne Bay, where the first thing they wanted to do was find a ship to get them out of there, because they said, nobody could maybe make it a railroad down here. There's no way. Well, she did not give up. This woman was tenacious, stubborn, some might say, and she had a vision. So she contacted Henry Flagler, who was building the Florida East Coast Railroad. But he had already heard about that survey, and he was not interested either. But she didn't give up. She saw another opportunity in the winter of 1894-95. There was a hard frost that went all the way from Palm Beach, all the way up to the state, all the way up to here. And it decimated most of the citrus crop in the state. There was a hard frost, there was a freeze. But she took some fresh orange blossoms. Now some say that she might have had an orange there too, but I don't know. But I know there were orange blossoms. She packed it in wet cotton and sent the package up to Palm Beach to Mr. Henry Flagler with a little note that said, I don't know what it's like up there, but the weather's just fine right here. And of course, the aroma of those orange blossoms are hard to forget. If you've ever smelled them, it will stay with us, right? But she did more than that. Now she got his interest, but she also offered him a deal that was very hard for him to turn down. She offered him 320 of her acres, 1/2 of all of her land, free and clear, if he would agree to bring the railroad down to what would become Miami, to Biscayne Bay, and build a hotel and all the amenities that go with it. All right. There's a chair. Make yourself, or right here. Make yourself comfortable. When I'm telling stories, I want pick a good chair. Make yourself comfortable. Well, I'm talking about Julia Tuttle. When she wrote to Henry Flagler, she gave him half of the land if he would agree to build a hotel and all the amenities that went with it, which meant electricity and sewage and water watering all the, and the streets, planting out the streets. She even talked William and Mary Brickell into also donating land for it. And so the railroad was built. It changed everything. Now, by the way, she got all of those amenities, the water and electricity, free for the rest of her life, which would be a total loss. She truly was a visionary. She really believed that people would come to this new town called Miami. And you know, always listen to your mama, because mama was right. People from all over the world know about the city of Miami. But of course, she wasn't the only woman that lived in South Florida at the time. The only one there by Biscayne Bay and what would become Miami. But just up the road a piece, there was another woman, Mary Bar Monroe. Now, Mary Bar Monroe, which by the way, this is the only photo I have ever found that shows her face. She was very shy. She always usually had a hat or turned away from it. It's the only photo I've ever found that had her face. Now, Mary Bar Monroe actually came down from New York City with her brand new husband, Kirk Monroe, the novelist. He wrote boys' adventure stories. And they started right here in Jacksonville, canoeing down the St. Johns River for their honeymoon. They loved it so much they didn't stop. They kept on going south. They just had a great time until they ended up in Coconut Grove, Florida, right up the road from what would become Miami. And she fell in love. That became their permanent home, Coconut Grove. In fact, she changed the spelling of it. It used to be C-O-C-O-A-N-U-T. And she thought that Anglican A does not belong in there, and they got rid of it. So you look at Coconut Grove, it has no A in it. But that was only the first of the things that she did. She fell in love with the flora and the fauna. Oh, and especially the birds. In fact, she became the founder of the Southern Tropical Audubon Society. But you have to remember, the egret poaching at that time, in the 1880s, it was kind of like the cocaine cowboys of the 1980s, but maybe even more bloodier. It was very vicious. It was worth a lot of money. And they would kill those birds during the mating season when they had just hatched the eggs and they had the little hatchlings, because then their plumes were the loveliest, leaving the little ones to die. Oh, and it was vicious. I have to tell you, she became quite an environmentalist and quite outspoken, especially when it came to egret poaching, well, and many other things as well. She learned to write many letters of apology. You can find them many in the newspaper where she had to write many more letters of apology, though they didn't really seem to apologize. I'm sorry that you took it that way. She was very good at that. She became known, as a matter of fact, when the railroad did finally come through, or when she would be traveling all the way up to Tallahassee or what have you, she would meet these beautiful, elegant ladies with their plumed hats, with the egret feathers all falling from them, and she would walk right up to them and snatch those feathers right from their hats. Now, please keep in mind, at that time, the ladies wore these long hat pins to keep them firmly fastened. And as they would sit there flapping their arms and screeching, she said, now you know how the egrets must feel. Oh, she was quite something. As a matter of fact, she did more than that. She also started a few other little things besides the Tropical Audubon Society. She founded a little club called the Pine Needles Club to teach children how to read and write, especially girls. That's right, Pine Needles. Oh, and she also was a founding member, a charter member of the Housekeepers Club. It sounds so innocuous, doesn't it? Keep in mind that the women's clubs were the centers of real power before women had the right to vote. They were the ones that got things done all over. As a matter of fact, she became president of the Florida Federation of Women's Clubs. And she met another friend through there, May Man Jennings. Now, May Man Jennings was the first lady of Florida at the time. She was also she founded the League of Women Voters of here in Florida. And she and her friend Mary Bar Monroe were able to get, with the power of the women's clubs behind them, to get a parcel of land on Paradise Key called Royal Palm Park to be opened so people could see the beauty of South Florida there. Unfortunately, some of the men, some of the politicians at the time, their very first thought was, oh, we will pave it over and put in a parking lot so people don't have a place to park and see those things. She said, what are you going to see if you pave it over? All I think about is the Joni Mitchell song, they paved paradise, and put in a parking lot, but they didn't because of her. They also said the women's club would run the park, and they did. They never paved it over. Eventually, they were able to get more land donated to it, and you might recognize that name. That park still stands. It's now known as Everglades National Park because of these women. Oh, yeah. And Mary Bar Monroe did more than that, too. As a matter of fact, she became a librarian, the very first librarian there in Coconut Grove. By the way, do you know that 90% of all the public libraries in the United States were founded by women's clubs before they had the right to vote? 90%. Well, she was one of them, and in fact, she got in touch with Mrs. Andrew Carnegie herself, and she talked her into donating 300 books that went down the Miami River by skiff to start that library. And that building still stands to this day. The front of that library is the original building built by a shipbuilder, another Monroe, not her husband. Her husband and Commodore Monroe, they said they must have been related back in the old country. But it still stands, as does her beloved Everglades National Park. And that brings me to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who will forever be, I hope, connected with Everglades National Park. She's the woman that wrote River of Grass, Everglades, and Everglades, River of Grass, and was an outspoken environmentalist. Not only did she introduce the world to our one and only Everglades here in Florida, it's the only one in the world. I still remember her at 108 years old, legally blind, holding on to someone's arms and going out and speaking so heartfelt that it was impossible not to want to go and cheer her on and protect our Everglades. And she said that she learned her love of nature sitting on Mary Bar Monroe's front porch. We do indeed stand on people's shoulders. And speaking of people who have left their legacy here, Mary McLeod Bethune. Now, Mary McLeod Bethune, I have to tell you, had a dream as a little girl. More than anything, she wanted to learn to read, to get an education. She really did. But she was born just after the Civil War, 15th of 17 children. Her older siblings and her parents had all been enslaved, and it was illegal to teach them how to read. But she had this dream. Now, her parents obviously were not able to read or write. They had both been enslaved, but though they were illiterate, they supported her dream, and she did. In fact, she became a teacher, and in 1904, she came here to Florida with her 5-year-old son and started a little school over there in Daytona Beach. It was the Daytona, I always want to get this confused, but Daytona Normal and Industrial Institute for Negro Girls. The only boy there was her son. Tuition was 50 cents a week. And if you couldn't pay it, she never turned you away. Oftentimes people would bring bits of food, anything they might have, but she would never turn a child away because they could not pay it. And of course that school still stands. We now know it as Bethune-Cookman College. But there were many. Now she was charming. She won people over. But there were many, I don't want this to fall, who did not approve, who did not want to see her or girls or people of color educated, including, of course, the Ku Klux Klan. One of my favorites, there are so many stories about this amazing woman, but one of my favorites was one night, a group of the Ku Klux Klan, yet again, came to destroy her school, burn it down. They came in all their cars, And they had all the lights turned off so they would come in the dark. And they came there in front of her school, all dressed in those robes and hoods, hiding themselves, got out of the things, started to put that cross up to burn it. They were trying to scare her away, if not to burn down that school. And she had all the lights turned off, but she had a generator. So though they had the public lights turned off, she had a generator. And she waited until all those men, about 80 men, got out of their cars there in the front of the school. And then she turned on the floodlights. She bathed them in lights that she had aiming right there in the front of the school. And at the same moment, with those girls gathered around her, they began to sing hymns. She was a woman of great faith. It must have sounded like the voices of angels. Can you imagine? It's like when you turn the light on in the bathroom and those cockroaches go scurrying. Much the same way. They were terrified. And she actually sang down the Klan. I know, it was amazing. So many. But this was a woman of great faith. She once said, invest in the human soul. All right? Invest in the human soul. She did more than that. Of course, she also founded hospitals for blacks and also integrated the Red Cross. She not only integrated, she was involved with the Red Cross here, but internationally. And she made friends, including the First Lady of the United States, Eleanor Roosevelt. She became friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, and what a powerhouse they were together. In fact, Mary McLeod Bethune became an advisor to 5 different United States presidents. Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and even Harry Truman. Not bad for a woman born just from the daughter of slaves. Good thing she never believed when people told her she couldn't. Her enthusiasm and commitment won people over all around the world. And, oh, by the way, she wasn't the only one here in Florida that was doing things before we had the right to vote. Marion Newhall Horowitz O'Brien, isn't that a great name? She became the first woman mayor in the South, here in Florida, in Moorhaven. She also was the president of the Moorhaven Bank. She was quite a businesswoman. And she helped found that town. Unfortunately, she was actually, it didn't last terribly long because she was actually forced to flee in the middle of the night. Her crime, she got a, good thing she wore some beautiful hats. She got a new part in her hair, but she saved her life, her hat did, because she was shot at. Her crime being that she was allowing the people of color, the blacks in the town who were helping build the town, to live on the same side of the railroad tracks. That was her crime. First female mayor here in the South, all right? Oh, and then, we'll see if you were paying attention. Back to the woman I was speaking about in the beginning, Dr. Anna Albertina Lindstedt Darrow, known as a petticoat doctor of the Everglades. She was wife, mother, artist, medical doctor, veterinarian even when called upon. This woman came down to Florida. Well, she went to medical school in 1903 with her husband, Roy. They became doctors of osteopathy because that was the osteopathic doctor was the only one that would allow both of them, men and women, to study at the same time. He felt both men and women could and should study medicine, unlike many others who said it would warp their brains and their bodies. It's true. Harvard physician saying that. But she and her husband went to medical school in 1903, though he did get to start 3 weeks before she did, because she had to wait to give birth to her second child. She had a 5-year-old, and once the baby was born, then she started. By the way, she still finished medical school with him on time, top of her class. And in 1909, they decided to come here to Florida. They heard it with great opportunities, and they came right down here to Jacksonville to take the Florida medical boards. And Dr. Anna Darrow passed with a general average of 98% plus. Now, the Dr. Fernandez, who was the head of the medical board at that time, had never seen anybody score so high. To this day, I don't know anybody's ever beaten that. And he said he could not wait to meet that young man and shake his hand. He laughed for years about when his son came out and saw it was Doc Anner, but he did shake her hand, so I give him credit for that. In fact, that what made them decide to really make their home here in Florida was while they were here, they went over to St. Augustine and climbed up to pick some fresh oranges in an orange grove there. And I think the aroma of those oranges and orange blossoms made them sure that they were going to move from Chicago and move here permanently. And they did. They opened practice here in Jacksonville, but they didn't stay long because Henry Flagler was opening a new spur line in a place that we now call Okeechobee. It was Tanty at the time. And he offered Roy a job there. And so they went down to Okeechobee when it was considered to be the wildest settlement east of the Mississippi, and rightfully so. It was wild country. Now, Roy had developed a little of a heart condition, and so he took care of the office practice. And it was Doc Anner, as the Cracker folk called her, who went around for miles. So, I mean, she never just turned anybody down, day or night, no matter how far. She'd go from Fort Drum over to Bassinger and all around Lake Okeechobee, any time of the day or night. She once said, by the way, the Cracker folk had never even heard of a female physician at that time, and ooh, they couldn't wait to come and have a look at her. This is a direct quote. This is what she said. She said they came for miles just to have a look, and I think they seemed a bit disappointed finding a woman in soft feminine-like clothes instead of one wearing a high-neck, stiff-neck collar and drunk in a monkey tail behind. But she really was a trailblazer, not only in her work, but she literally had to blaze trails just to get where she was going. She was. She braved swampland and alligators and venomous snakes and some of the most dangerous outlaw gangs this state or any other has ever seen, including the Ashley Mobley gang. Now, if you've never heard of them, think about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, but a lot more vicious. All right? She was once actually taken blindfolded about 10 miles or so out into the Everglades, so she couldn't give up their position, simply to help them. And she never carried a gun. And she said she was never afraid. She said it was not her job to judge or condone, but simply uphold her oath to heal. She also said, and this is the one quote I want to make sure I read right, because I love this one. She did it to heal the sick, nurse the wounded, and her favorite, deliver the babies. She was once asked how many babies she had delivered. She said, I have no idea, too many to count, but not too many to remember. She also said, according to her, that a country doctor should, and this is the quote, know how to change tires at 4 a.m. and in the freezing rain, set a fractured femur with a piece of string and a flat iron, and get just as good a result as the mechanical engineering staff at the big city hospital, at 10% their fee, of course. Be willing to drive through 10 miles of mud to tend to the child of a drunkard, help with the breech birth on a kitchen table with their grandma giving the anesthetic and advice, be able to diagnose diphtheria from tonsillitis with the nearest laboratory 48 miles away, and pull the 3-pronged fish hook molar of a 250-pound hired man, aided only by moonshine and faith in God. Those are her words. All right? And oftentimes she would be gone for several days at a time, and it was dark. If she's crossing the Everglades, she would go. They got a brand new Model T Ford right here in Jacksonville, Florida. Henry Ford sent it to them and sent them a driver to teach them how to drive. She said, I don't think they do that anymore. But they had the Model T, but where that couldn't go, she would use the horse and cart or just on horseback, push-pull canoe, or motorboat, however she had to go. And if she was crossing the Everglades, she would often be gone for 2 or 3 days at a time. And it got dark, she just camped where she was. And she found the beauty there. That's why she said, if you've never seen heard the roar of a bull alligator and saw a night bird answer, "Why, you haven't lived." She always brought her paints with her. She usually painted in watercolors when she was traveling like that. Oils were when she had more time at home or later on. I own 3 of her oil paintings at home. I do. She saw, and she even gained the trust of the Seminole Indians. She didn't speak their language. There were some that spoke some English. A lot of it was done by sign language. But they trusted her so much, they actually made her an honorary member of the Seminole tribe, including giving them the beads for around her neck. And she had that in common with a woman that she would meet when she and her husband moved down to Fort Lauderdale. They were invited in 1924 to move to Fort Lauderdale by Will Marshall. He was the very first mayor of Fort Lauderdale. And they said, "This town is growing. We have almost 3,000 people. We need more doctors." And when she came down there, she met a woman, Ivory Cromartie Stranahan, who lived only about 6 blocks from her, also very involved in women's clubs. And she, too, became an honored member of the Seminole Indians. She helped them get their land. As a matter of fact, they called her, Ivory Stranahan, they called her Wacha Esta Hutri, Little White Mother to the Seminoles. Interesting, not very happened to very many people. They ended up living only 6 blocks away. Now, Ivory Stranahan, she was Broward County's very first school teacher, but when she married Frank Stranahan, who owned the trading post there, she had to give up that job because women could not be married and teach school. Now, men could, but not women. And she did more this. She started, after she became the very first school teacher, she still believed in educating, also very involved with women's clubs, and yes, indeed, started the library that still stands. In fact, that women's club that she built and the first main library of Broward County still both stand there. The women's club building is right in front of the main library. She started the library by passing out books from behind the candy counter at that trading post. But she did so much more than that. She also built and funded schools for African Americans because there were none. So she, a white woman, but she felt that everybody deserved to have those same rights. And she said that. Oh, and anybody here own a house here in Florida? Out of curiosity, raise your hand. Anybody own a house? You can thank this woman here for the Homestead Exemption Act. No, it's true. She saw people losing their homes because they couldn't afford the taxes on it. So she went all the way up to Tallahassee to make sure that Homestead Exemption Act got passed. Now, of course, she had to stay up in the galley with the other women, and the men down on the floor were paying her no mind. So she got up on one of the folding chairs and got up and said, "Excuse me, yeah, you down there?" and made sure she was heard. And we still have, to this day, that Homestead Exemption Act. And she changed a little place that was nothing more than a little trading post that her husband had started there on the New River into a city, Fort Lauderdale, recognized all around the world. And it's interesting, because she also met another person who lived right down the beach a while, named Rose Weiss. Rose Weiss became known as the mother of Miami Beach. Now, Rose Weiss, she came to this country as a little girl, and as a mother in her early 30s of 3 young children, was dying. She lived in New York, she and her husband and her family, and she had asthma so badly that she couldn't breathe. They were trying everything. At one point, they actually moved from Brooklyn to the Bronx, it being higher up. They thought it might help. You know, when she said, when you're that sick, you're willing to try anything. Unfortunately, it didn't make enough of a difference. And then a friend of her husband's said his mother had just spent the winter down in this little sandbar right off of Miami called Miami Beach. And it worked wonders. She could breathe for the first time in years. So they were willing to try anything. So in 1919, she came down with her 2-year-old son, Gene. She left the 2 older kids, they were enrolled in school with her husband, and they all moved in with her parents. She said, at least I knew they'd be taken care of. because her mother would be cooking. And she moved down, and within days, she changed the face of the town we call Miami Beach. First of all, as soon as she touched Florida soil, she said she could breathe again. And she repaid it 100-fold. Literally within a couple of days, she had met, the city council members and the Chief Stevenson, the fire chief, who let her son climb up on the fire engine. And talking to some of them, they said, "Oh, it sounds like you might be interested. We're about to have a city council meeting. Would you like to attend?" She said, "Oh, that sounds interesting." So she did. For 38 years, she never missed a meeting. They called her the unofficial 8th council person. She said somebody had to keep an eye on things. In 1920, she went back to New York, but by 1920, she and her husband knew that this was the place. They had moved down permanently. And she started a little thing called the Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce. She was the only woman present. It was a good thing she was there. Within 1 week, she had recruited 60 new members. Somebody once said to you, you could sell straw hats to the Eskimos. She said, it's not that. It's not that, but if I believe in something, then it's easy for me to sell. And she did. As a matter of fact, she sold, during World War II, over $5 million worth of war bonds, more than any other person in the entire state. But she started a few other little things too. She was there, of course, she had children now enrolled in the schools, so she was very involved. And one day she came to the local elementary school and she sees a little boy outside, tears streaming down his face. So she goes up, she asks him, "Excuse me, what is the matter?" And he says that he was hungry, he didn't have enough money for lunch. He didn't have his lunch money, he had lost it. He had lost it. She said she knew. She was a mother, she knew. He didn't lose it. He didn't have the 10 cents to begin with. Well, she went inside and took him in, and she made arrangements with the PTA and the principal of the school. From then on, he would get free lunches. And yet, at the same time, we made sure he had little chores to do around the school. He should not feel like he was getting charity. She said, children, just like adults, have their pride. We all need to be treated with respect and dignity. She started the free lunch program. As a matter of fact, that day, in order to explain to his parents, she walked him home to his school, and it shouldn't be a total loss. Along the way, she got him a little washing up, a new haircut, new shoes, his toes were sticking out from it, some new clothes. When they got to the house, the mom hardly recognized her own son. But then she found out the woman's story. She and her husband had both been looking for work unsuccessfully for months, and they were hungry. So Rosie, she went to talk to people that she knew. She was a very friendly sort. And she found both of them work. She got the husband working for the city. He worked there for many, many years. And she found, for the mother, she found a job in one of the hotels. She founded almost every social service organization on Miami Beach was founded by this woman. She even included that after a while, people started talking, "Oh, you have troubles? Go to Mother Weiss, go to Mrs. Weiss, she'll find a way." So many people came actually for her to help. At one point, someone in the city called out the police to protect her. They were afraid she was going to get mobbed. And that's how she started the welfare department of Miami Beach, which she ran until they were able to hire somebody. Including, she started things like, the very first Christmas tree. And when the other ladies didn't show up to decorate, this little Jewish woman, she's sitting there throwing on decorations. When the men asked her, what do you know from this? She said, what do I know, but where are your wives? Those things still continue to this very day. The Taxpayer Association, she helped fund the $1 million pier for all of those service people during World War II. She did say that the hardest thing that she ever founded, that ever she got done, was a children's park. She started the library. She started the first two, not only first hospital, the first two hospitals. The first synagogue, of course, because she was Jewish, started in her apartment. It is now where the Jewish Museum is to this very day in Miami Beach. Oh, by the way, she also started the second. You always have to have two. There's always going to be some discussion. The hardest thing she said she ever founded was a children's park because children didn't vote. It still stands to this day, though, and it was called the Rose Weiss Friendship Park, though now I think it's a dog park, but that's another story. She paid back again and again. Oh, by the way, all of this was done when, as a Jewish woman, the only place that they could rent or live was the southernmost tip below 5th Street on Miami Beach. Anything above 5th Street, the deeds were no Jews were allowed to rent or own. You know, Carl Fisher, who really built Miami Beach, once said that while he built Miami Beach with his money, she built it with her spirit. But it took him a long time to get those things changed. They had all those signs on buildings that would be restricted. Anybody know what restricted? Does anybody remember that? It meant there were signs that said no Jews, no coloreds, no dogs. That's what restricted. Only South part, the southernmost tip. Of course, we now know that as South Beach. Some of the most expensive real estate in the world. I like to call it Rosie's Revenge. And I think I don't know if it's something in the water or maybe the orange juice, but think of some of the other women. There's Ileana Ross Layton. She was, oh boy, did she break barriers. She had a whole career of firsts. She was the first Latina in the Florida House, the first Latina in the Florida Senate, the first Latina to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives. She was the first woman to ever chair a standing committee, and a Republican who still had the courage to go against the majority Republicans, even at that time, if she did not feel it was in the people's best interest. She was the one who co-sponsored the Respect for Marriage Act, which repealed the Defense of Marriage Act, and became the first Republican in the House to support same-sex marriage. She followed what she believed was right, even if it went against her party's wishes. Oh, and then, of course, speaking of politicians, Shirley Chisholm. Okay, now, Shirley Chisholm was from up north. However, she retired and called Florida home at the end of her life. In 1968, she was the very first black woman ever elected to Congress. And, oh, I love it. She described herself as unbossed and unbiased. She became the first black presidential candidate from a major party and the first woman to ever run for the Democratic Party nomination. And this is what she said. I am not the candidate of Black America, although I am black and proud. I am not the candidate of the women's movement of this country, although I am a woman and equally proud of that. I am the candidate of the people, and my presence before you symbolizes a new era in political history. Now, Shirley Chisholm, originally for that political, when she was nominated for the presidential nomination, she wasn't allowed on for the debates on TV. Oh, she was banned from it. But by the way, she refused to accept that. She never accepted the status quo. She became the first one to take part in a U.S. presidential debate on TV. She retired here to Florida, just down the coast a little bit to Palm Coast, and then again, she continued again making an impact on her community, being involved in it. She reminded people that if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring in a folding chair. In fact, in Palm Coast, for this trailblazing woman, they named a trail after her. I've walked it. There is a Shirley Chisholm Trail in Palm Coast where she retired. And then we had others. We had storytellers. We had Betty Mae Jumper. It was my honor to have worked with this woman. Seminole. She was actually born of a Seminole mother and a French trapper father, white. And when she was born, she had no place in either world. There were those who wanted to see her killed. And luckily, she was sent away to get an education because she had no place. She was the very first Seminole to get a high school degree. The very first one to go to get a nursing degree, and later on started their health department of the Seminole tribe. Oh, and by the by, she also became the first and so far only female tribal chairperson of the Seminole Indians. She was also the tribal storyteller. You can find her book, Legend of the Story of the Seminoles. She was an alligator wrestler. I was privileged. She was. Oh, every alligator wrestler. She's the one that pointed this out to me. Take note, they all had scars on their hands. Quite a remarkable woman, and a political activist. And then, of course, we have, speaking of other writers, Zora Neale Hurston. Raised in Eatonville, Florida, one of the first all-black middle-class communities. Her father was mayor, and she would sit on those porches and listen to the stories. Talk about storytellers. Luckily for us, she became, during the WPA, she came back and collected those stories, and you can still find them on the Smithsonian or in many of her books, like Of Mules and Men and Jonah's Gourd. Of course, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And when she came back, she worked with Stetson Kennedy, another amazing man, but because he was a white man and she was a black woman, they could not travel together. Even they were collecting some of the same stories. But her stories still live on. Amazing woman. And then, of course, we have, speaking of writers, Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. Now, she was a cussing kind of, hard-drinking, chain-smoking kind of a woman. Oh, she could speak her mind, let me tell you that. And she loved Florida. She's the one that put the Cracker Florida on the map with her Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Yearling. And then she followed that up with her next novel, Cross Creek, all right? She lived a very challenging life, but it was filled with beauty and sacrifice for her art and for beloved Florida. She loved Florida. Some of the other role models, Janet Reno, first female United States Attorney General. And after serving for 8 years, some difficult times, she moved back to this house, the very house that her mother, Janet Wallace Wood Reno, who had also been, by the way, a newspaper writer, that her mother built by hand. And she lived there for the rest of her life. Remarkable stuff they came from. Oh, and then, of course, we have Roxy Bolton. Roxy Bolton, again, we may not know her name, but she's changed many lives around this country. In Miami, she challenged the law, and she won successfully, where restaurants could have men's-only areas. It was before we had Sunshine State laws. So all the male politicians would gather and do their little deals where the women couldn't be listening in. And she challenged that law successfully in 1969. By the way, you know, when we got, I was talking about the 19th Amendment. Do you know, Florida did not ratify it for a long time. We ratified it retroactively. Does anybody know when it was ratified? Any idea? 1969, the same year we reached the moon. Florida ratified it. And the same time she got those laws changed. But she did more than that too. She also founded, she was an early member of the National Organization for Women, and she founded Women in Distress. And she founded and established the nation's very first rape treatment center here in Florida, Jackson Memorial Hospital there in Miami. She's the one that did that. It's hard to find her in any of our history books. But even from land onto the air, of course, we had Bessie Coleman. Bessie Coleman was the very first African-American, first Native American to ever get a pilot's license. Actually got an international pilot's license because they wouldn't allow her to take flying lessons here in the United States. She had to go all the way to France. But she did come back, and she flew doing stunts all over. She made such a name for herself. Unfortunately, she ended up here in Jacksonville for her very last flight. She died in an accident, but we still remember her. And then, of course, we have Amelia Earhart, which will always be connected with Opa-locka Airport down there in Miami, from where she took off for her round-the-world trip and disappeared a few days later, about a month later. They do think just recently they may have actually found that airplane. Go have a seat. Thank you. And then we have Jamie Green. Now, some of us as storytellers, she was a storyteller. And played the ukulele. She was my ukulele teacher, amongst other things, at 103. Yeah, and when she fell, somebody fell on her, and the only thing she was worried about, she had broken her femur. The only thing is they're taking her off, wheeling her to the hospital. It was for the operation was, you have to cover my gig. I have a gig on Thursday. Don't forget. She did, and a friend did. But this woman, Jamie Green, not only was a storyteller and an entertainer, but in World War II, and this is her, in World War II, she taught the pilots in the Air Force to fly by instrumentation. She never became a part of the WACs. I think she was too old to join. But she did it as a civilian. And at 102, and that's the picture over here, at 102, she went back to the very same training thing that she had done back in World War II. This was an amazing woman. These are the women whose shoulders we stand on. And speaking of flights, don't forget the astronauts. Not only those who have trained here, like Sally Ride and Judith Resnick, but we have our very own. We have Jan Davis, who was born and raised here in Cocoa Beach, or Wendy Lawrence, born right here in Jacksonville, Florida. We have so many ones. And then there is people who are still making those difference. Grace Lynn. Grace Lynn, at age 100, made a quilt to fight against banned books. And she went to the Martin County School Board with this beautiful handmade quilt at 100 years old and spoke so eloquently of why it was so important for us to fight against people who wanted to ban books, that her husband had risked his life during World War II so we would all have the right to be able to read these things. She was so eloquent that people took notice. They actually made a film about her that was nominated by the Academy Awards, and she got to go to the Academy Awards. And she's still going strong at 102. And then, oh wait, let's not forget, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Supreme Court Justice from right here in Florida, from Miami. That's exactly right. We have so many of these women. I'm looking in the room right now. Gentlemen, look around. Turn to the women next to you, behind you. Yeah, you see them too. I'm looking right now of the women who also continue to make the difference. These are not just in our history. We are living this to this very day. I know we're getting close to the end, and I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. There was an ad a few years ago for Women's History Month that I've never forgotten. And it was, if you can see her, you can be her. But what if she is unseen and unheard? How many of these women I've talked about tonight never made it into any history books or a little tiny paragraph if they did? I want you to think for just a second, and I'd love to hear of some of these stories. I wish we had even more time. Who are the women in your lives, in your community, that have transformed your life, your community, your state, your world? It might be a family member. It might be a teacher. It might be a librarian. It might have been somebody in the post office. It could be almost anyone. Who are the women who have changed your lives? Think about them. Please share their stories. We all need to hear that. We all need to have a little bit of hope. And there's nothing more hopeful, at least for me, than being able to share stories, connecting uno al otro, one to another. Thank you so much for listening to me. If anybody has any stories they want to share, please feel free. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions or comment, or you're thinking about a woman you'd like to share a story? Yes.
I'm going to ask some of my neighbors at the beach, because I don't live out here, I live in town, but isn't it true true that we recently, in the past few years, we had women were mayors of Jack's Beach?
Oh, yes.
For the first time ever, we had 4 women who were leading our.
I met one of them because she came to my storytelling. I think actually this program, and I can't remember where it was. I don't remember her name, but it was near here. Yeah.
We were an all-women commission in Atlantic Beach for 3 years.
Woo-hoo! And you got things done, didn't you?
Yes, we did.
Oh, I love
The
that.
executive director of this museum is female, and she's also the mayor of Jacksonville Beach.
All right.
Christine Hoffman.
Oh, I love this. Yay. Anybody? Oh, I love this. Yes.
Can I just share a story about my grandmother, whose name was Maud Grosvenor, and she went to Trinity College, Dublin, in about 1890, and in those days it was extremely unusual for a lady to get a degree. And I can remember as a 10 or 11-year-old, when my father took me to Dublin to Trinity College, he was looking through all the records, and I was reading a comic or something like this, and suddenly he said, "Oh my God, it's true." And he found the records.
Oh, I love that. Oh my God, it's true. Probably not, yeah, there would have been very few females that would have gotten the degree. There might have been some who went to college. So many of them were now not able to get their degrees. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any understanding of why in the United States the people decided or had this reasoning that women couldn't vote and that women
There's one on the box.
do the things that they had to get the laws passed? What was the logic behind that?
That's a great question because for the life of me, I don't truly understand it either. But I think fear and power, it works funny things on people. You know, we forget how recent some of those changes are. So it's like, what were they thinking? Now, some of us might remember, women could not have their own bank accounts, credit cards, until I was in college. All right? Unless you had your husband or father's permission. Couldn't get a credit card, right? There were a lot of those, I mean, something as simple as that we're talking, okay, maybe it is a while ago, but this is 1970s or something. There's so much of it still to this day, or some of the laws, now some of the, and then the culture has to, we change the laws, then the culture has to keep up with it, catch up with it. And that's another story altogether. Why is it? I have no idea, because we've been proven again and again. But like what I was talking about with Doc Anner, there was a Harvard professor who literally said that if women studied higher education, especially if they wanted to be doctors, but any higher education, like your grandmother, they would develop puny bodies and overlarge brains. And Doc Anner said, I have never had a puny body in my life. She was quite a strong, healthy woman, yeah. So I don't know. That's a great question, though. Thank you.
It just seems illogical, and it seems.
Run for Congress, please.
Just let me say, I'm disappointed in the males of the last that would be discriminatory against women. It disappoints me, just like it disappoints me that we would discriminate against people of color.
Absolutely.
It's just
And
frustrating
yet
to try to
there's
understand
always,
that.
even with that, I think even though the majority obviously felt that, especially those in power, because I want to keep that power, I think that's part of it. But I also think that there's always allies too. You just need to look. I think of Mr. Rogers. Okay, so I grew up in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. No, I quite literally did in Squirrel Hill. He was my neighbor. He lived about 3 houses down from me. I literally grew up in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And he said, look for the helpers. By the way, he really was exactly like he looked like on TV. He spoke the same way, he was the same patient. He and my mother were the only two adults I actually remember who would get down to eye level when you were a kid to talk to you. So look for the helpers. So that's a really good point. I have no idea why, but there's always the helpers. I think there's always been allies, even if we feel outnumbered at times. Anyways, thank you so very much. I appreciate you all. Oh, yes.
I wanted to recommend Idella Parker's Marjorie Rawlings' Perfect Maid. She's the woman behind Marjorie Rawlings. When Marjorie was too drunk to drive, Idella drove her.
That's exactly
She
right.
supported her entirely. So, great book, great author.
Oh, and also, there is the survey right here. You can take your little phones out. I don't know if you have any, because usually don't do the printed ones anymore.
I'll email out a survey
Or
to
email
everyone.
to everybody. If you would all take a moment to do it, it doesn't have to be long. I would truly appreciate that. Be honest on it. I have no problem with any of that. But when they get the feedback, that's how the Florida Humanities is able to continue presenting programs like this. And so much of the funding has been cut. I'm very grateful that the Florida Talks program is still being around and still being funded for how long we don't know. But we would really appreciate any kind of feedback. That's how they get their funding. So thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your stories. Keep those stories coming and please keep sharing them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.